Heading south from Santa Rosa de Cabal, I found myself driving through the emerald green hills and valleys of southern Colombia. The landscape was incredibly beautiful in typical Colombian fashion. And early in the day I encountered some incredible Don Quixote-inspired metal art on the side of the road. As the day progressed, I found myself driving through nearly endless acres of sugarcane fields. And if I wanted to cover any ground at all, I had to make like a local and utilize creative methods to get around the lumbering cane trains that dominated the roads.
Well, as far as I can tell, these signs only exist to be turned into faces. Seriously though, does anybody know what this means? I have no idea. Well, I found a place to camp for the night. At around $14, it's a bit pricey, but the good news is it comes with a pool.
In the morning I managed to scare up an agouti, absconding with a mango at least half as big as it was. And as I spent the day driving the windy mountain roads between Cali and Pasto, I was reminded multiple times of one of the advantages of driving a motorcycle. Pretty much anywhere in Latin America, motorcycles get a free pass to go directly to the front of the line anytime there's an obstruction in traffic, which turns out to be a super awesome ability on windy mountain roads that are under construction and packed with slow-moving trucks. And since the KLR is generally much more powerful and faster than the rest of the motorcycles that are typically on the Colombian mountain roads, I found that I had long stretches of highway all to myself for much of the day. I quickly came to welcome the construction stops. They weren't a delay, they were a great way to pass all the slow-moving traffic in one fell swoop, and these forced rest breaks certainly did my poor sore butt quite a bit of good.
I'm starting to drop down out of the mountains, and it's starting to warm up quite a bit.
One of the things that still continues to amaze me about the Andes is that you can drive for half an hour and travel from jungle to desert and back again. This wide variety of climates is of course due to the extreme topography of the region.
Well, so far I'm pretty happy with my camp spot for tonight. I'm just north of Pasto in southern Colombia. It costs $4 a night to camp here, and I let one of the employees ride my motorcycle, and they shared their lunch with me, which was really nice.
And after talking for a while, I found out they were working on planting a garden, so I gave them some of the seeds from my mobile seed bank. The next morning it was raining, so I reluctantly donned my rain gear and headed off into the cold gray clouds that were spilling over the mountains. The rain cleared up for a few minutes, and I ran into an awesome Argentinian couple, who were riding around the world on tiny 125cc bikes. And then shortly thereafter it started to rain again, and showed no sign of letting up for the rest of the day. I reached the Ecuadorian border slightly wetter than I would have liked. I braced myself for long lines and loads of paperwork, but things turned out a bit nicer than I expected.
5 minutes. It took me 5 minutes to leave Colombia, to get my passport stamped and to get the motorcycle paperwork taken care of. I love this country. And on top of that, everything is well signed. There's great signs at all the critical junctions in the road. Makes navigation super easy. I almost wish I wasn't leaving Colombia. Almost. So the crossing from Colombia to Ecuador took no more than half an hour. I'm so happy to be in South America. And it was free. I didn't have to pay anything either. Now all I have to do is drive through the rain to my next destination.
If I hadn't already known it to be true, I wouldn't have believed Ecuador could be even more beautiful than Colombia. And I'm quite certain that if it hadn't been raining, the ride from the border to Ibarra would have been one of the best of the trip. Upon my arrival in Ibarra, my rain-dampened spirits were quickly lifted, as I was reunited with Gabby after 7 months of extreme geographical separation. And then my spirits were dampened again by the emergence of a possibly serious problem with the motorcycle.
The water pump is dripping oil, and somehow the cooling water is getting into the oil, which is not good. So we're gonna go to a motorcycle shop today and see if we can get it fixed.
We easily found a mechanic shop, and my spirits were lifted again when the mechanics told us that the water pump issue shouldn't be too difficult to fix. But then my hopes of a speedy repair were crushed, as the removal of the oil screen revealed small flakes of metal, signifying that somewhere the engine was tearing itself apart. With a heavy heart, I left my motorcycle in the hands of my new mechanic friends so that they could investigate the problem further, and I headed off to drown my sorrows by eating a ton of delicious food and vent my frustration by terrorizing the hapless pigeons in the park. The next morning, the engine was minus a few more pieces, but there was still no sign of the problem. But by the afternoon, we finally discovered the culprit. A tiny spring inside the engine had snapped, allowing the chain-tensioning sprocket that it kept in check to run wild. And this errant sprocket slowly began shaving little bits of aluminum off of the crankcase. Fortunately, this problem could be solved with parts that were all readily available, and my mechanics said they would have the bike up and running again within 2 days. I decided to make good use of my downtime by doing all of the cleaning and maintenance I had planned on doing during my stay in Gabby's hometown of Cuenca. And it certainly felt much better to be doing something productive rather than just sitting around moping over my poor disassembled bike the whole time. Of course, in between all the maintenance and repair, we still found time to explore Ibarra, which is not a bad place to be stuck for a few days. The old town is quite picturesque, and its churches and shops are centered around two large parks that provide an excellent place to relax on a warm afternoon. The next day was spent putting everything back together, and we actually ended up staying at the shop until 10 o'clock at night in an attempt to get everything ready for the next morning. My mechanics graciously let me use their welder to repair one of my crash bars that I had discovered a crack in, and they actually seemed pretty impressed by the fact that this gringo knew how to weld. Late in the evening, one more minor problem popped up, and we had to wait for a store to open in the morning to buy a new part. By 11 o'clock the next day, my wallet was $200 lighter, but I had a fully functional motorcycle and a bunch of new friends in Ibarra. We picked up a second helmet for Gabby, and returned to our campsite to pack up the last of our gear. The campsite here at Finca Summerwind attracts some pretty spectacular overland rigs, but the mere thought of fueling up one of these behemoths is enough to make me shake in my boots. I can't imagine having to tear down the engine. Anyway, it's probably best not to dwell on such nightmares. It's time to get back on the road. And now the real adventure begins.
We just crossed the equator. Do you know what that means?
Por supuesto.
What does it mean?
Que pasamos por el Ecuador, la línea ecuatorial.
You know what else it means?
Okay.
It means winter is coming.
Eso es.
And the further we drive south, the colder it's going to get.
That,
No, it's not good.
We managed to make it to just south of Quito before the light started to fade and it started to get dreadfully cold out. And since we weren't properly equipped to camp out in the cold, we decided to look for somewhere to stay that came with a roof and walls. We spent a cozy night bundled up in this nice little hostel in the town of Chopi, and when we headed out the next morning we noticed that the town thermometer registered a chilly 10 degrees Celsius. The day started out pleasant enough, but we quickly ran into some weather. And after about an hour of driving we had to stop and pull over and wait for some rain to pass. Fortunately, we found an abandoned restaurant off the side of the highway where we could take shelter. By midday, things had cleared up, and we had a very pleasant lunch break sitting next to a river in a picturesque little valley. And after that, we had absolutely spectacular driving weather. But the clouds started to creep closer and closer, and eventually, once again, we rounded a corner and found ourselves in dense fog and drizzling rain. Because of the poor conditions, we slowed to a snail's crawl, and we spent the next 3 hours being cold and wet, until finally, just outside of Cuenca, the storm broke. We arrived a little wet and completely exhausted, but at least we were at home sweet home. That's all for now. As usual, if you have any questions or comments, please let me know, and I'll see you all next time.